LinkedIn presents.
You know, I've always believed that everything is better than when you share it. So before I go, I wanted to share a graduation gift with you.
That's Oprah Winfrey, back in 2008, wrapping up a commencement address at Stanford. She tells the 4,000 graduates seated before her,
I really wanted to give you cards.
that's her trademark move, after all. But 4,000 graduates? That's a lot of cars. Too many. So instead,
Underneath your seats, you'll find two of my favorite books.
one is by a famous spiritual teacher. It's all about living in the now. The other is a celebration of creativity, storytelling, invention, feats of right-brain thinking. It's called A Whole New Mind, and it's by lawyer turned speechwriter turned author
Daniel Pink.
Daniel Pink.
Daniel H. Pink.
With that Oprah giveaway, Dan Pink achieved, in the words of the New York Times, full guru status, which sounds impressive. But what does it actually mean? Well, it means that when you write your next big book, the whole world is watching. And when Dan Pink published Drive, that's exactly what happened. I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is Next Big Idea Classics. Today, what really motivates people? A new year means a new installment in our occasional series, Next Big Idea Classics, where I sit down with the author of a classic book, one that changed the conversation when it debuted and has stood the test of time. Today, that book is Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, written by my friend and Next Big Idea Club curator, Daniel Pink. I read it when it came out in 2009. A lot of people did. Drive hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. At the time, I was starting my third business, leading a team of about 25 people, and Drive showed me that human motivation was far more complex and hopeful, frankly, than I previously believed. The conventional assumption at the time, an assumption that I think is still common, is that we humans are driven primarily by extrinsic rewards like salaries and bonuses and stock options and employee of the month certificates. But Dan had a different story to tell. And it's a story that changed how businesses operate, how managers lead their teams, and honestly, how I think about every person I've tried to motivate, including, perhaps most importantly, myself. In Drive, Dan draws on decades of research to demonstrate that when it comes to tasks that require creativity and problem solving, the most important work, in other words, offering people financial incentives not only doesn't help, it can be counterproductive. Why? Because extrinsic rewards have the effect of narrowing our focus. If you want people to do creative work, you have to build environments where people's natural intrinsic motivation that comes from within, flourishes. What drives intrinsic motivation? Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We're going to talk about how to cultivate that magical trifecta. But we're not just looking back. We'll also get into how Dan's ideas have evolved in the 15 years since he wrote Drive, particularly in light of developments like remote work and the gig economy. And later in the show, we'll turn to AI. If we're headed for a future where computers and robots can do almost anything, what will make humans want to do anything at all? Who better to ask than the guy who wrote the book on human motivation?
From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Struggling to keep up with customers? With Agentforce and Salesforce Data Cloud, deploy AI agents that know your customers and act on their own. That's because Data Cloud brings all your data to Agentforce, no matter where it lives. Get started at salesforce.com/data.
Daniel Pink, welcome back. to the next big idea. We've missed you, Dan. It's been weeks since you've been on the show.
I know. I feel like I should be like one of those daily guests, or almost like basically be your, I'm showing my age here, be your Ed McMahon. I'll be Ed McMahon to your Johnny Carson.
Karnak is attempting to divine an answer while you're sitting here giggling. May I have silence, please?
Yes. You've had it many times before.
Well, you're back, Dan, for a good reason, which is that your legendary
Not that
book,
I need a good reason. I have so much time in my hands. I just say, hey, Rufus, can I be on the show again?
That's autonomy right there. Dan.
Yeah.
That's what. You're welcome. Anytime. Well, we have selected your book, Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, as the third book in our classic series of episodes.
Wow.
In which we're featuring the most influential books of the last 20 years. And the first two were Atomic Habits by James Clear, which sold a few copies, and Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And Drive is just hitting its 15th birthday, which is astonishing. Can you believe it?
I cannot.
Well, Dan, I met your book Drive before I met you, and Drive had a big impact on me when it first came out. And I think it's fair to say it had a big impact on the culture at large. And for those unfortunate listeners who have not yet read the book Drive, what's the thesis of the book?
The thesis of the book is that we have been, especially in business, overweighted on extrinsic motivators.
Yep.
Rewards that come from the outside, and underweighted on intrinsic motivators, rewards that come from the inside. And the reason we call the book Drive is that human beings have lots of drives. We have a biological drive, but we're not only that. We have a reward and punishment drive. In general, and this is something that sometimes people get wrong. In general, people, if you reward behavior, you often will get more of it. I mean, much of the time. If you punish behavior, you often will get less of it, much of the time.
Yeah.
And so humans have biological drives and reward and punishment drive, but I don't think that anybody would go out there and say that fully describes who human beings are, because we have this other drive. We do things because we're interested. We do things because they engage us. They excite us. We do things because they contribute to the world and they're the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's an important drive. And we have science. That's just not a touchy-feely thing. We have science showing that is a powerful driver of performance and well-being. And it felt to me that, especially in business, we were not looking at people three-dimensionally, that we were stopping with that second dimension.
And you call this kind of third dimension motivation 3.0 or type I behavior for like intrinsically motivated behavior, which at one point you liken to, you say that type I behavior is like solar energy in the sense that it's like renewable. And type X behavior, extrinsically motivated behavior, is like a coal plant, right? In the sense that it's costly and finite. So to some degree, this is that playing to our intrinsic motivated behavior is a better path. Would you say that?
For many, many things.
Yeah.
I'll give you the gist of how sort of the clearer way that I think I understand this research today. All right. And it's this. We have this idea of multiple drives and so forth. And most people don't say that's not true. Okay.
Right.
So when we go into the actual sort of what kind of rewards are effective and what kind of rewards are not, I think what the research tells us very clearly, all right, is that it's this one kind of motivator, and I write about it in the book, what I call an if-then reward.
Yes.
As in what psychologists call a controlling contingent reward. If you do this, then you get that. If-then rewards, we have a lot of evidence that they're very effective for simple tasks with short time horizons.
Yeah.
They work really well. But the surprising truth is that those if-then rewards are far less effective for complex tasks with longer time horizons.
Yes.
Now, understanding why that's the case is actually really important. And here there is nuance. The reason that this is true is not that people don't like rewards. The reason this is true is that they love rewards.
Yeah,
right?
right.
Rewards get our attention. And the thing is, they get our attention in this very kind of narrow, fixed way. That's good if the task is algorithmic. It's less good if the time horizon is long and you need to look expansively. And this is one reason, going back to the metaphor, that other kinds of rewards are more like solar energy. If you give somebody an if-then reward for something, if you stuff those envelopes, I'm going to give you 100, all those envelopes within the next hour, I'll give you $100.
Yeah.
you're going to get your envelope stuff.
I'm in. Tell me where to
100%.
start.
No question about it.
Yeah.
But if I do that day after day, in a couple of days, you're going to want $110.
Yeah.
And then you're going to want $120. And we're going to have to be shoveling, more coal into the furnace. And so not only is it more costly to keep shoveling things just directly, but it comes with all kinds of externalities like coal does.
Yeah.
Where solar energy has far fewer externalities.
In all the details that I'd forgotten in the 15 years since I first read Drive, among the 3 or 4 or 5 kind of big things that stuck with me, one of them was the candlestick problem. Should we share the candlestick problem with our listeners?
It's a fairly classic test of divergent thinking and conceptual reasoning, where they give you a box of some tacks, and then they give you a candle, and your job is to, and some matches, and your job is to get the candle to
attach it to the wall.
Yeah. So the candle's lit and attached to the wall, and people can't figure out what to do. And the solution here, in my poor telling, is you take the tacks, you dump them out of the box, you use the box as a platform for the candle, and use the tacks to affix the platform to the wall so the candle can stand in the platform.
But most people don't initially think of the box as an object that can be used. They just think of it as a container.
Right. And the phenomenon, the thinking phenomenon, the sort of thinking glitch there is called functional fixedness.
Right.
Is that we think of the box only as a receptacle for the tacks, when in fact it can have multiple uses.
So I happen to have the details in front of me, which I'll share. So there are 2 groups. Group 1 is told, this is a puzzle, see if you can solve it. Group 2 is told, if your time is among the fastest 25% of all people tested, you'll get $5. If you're the fastest among everybody who tries to solve this, you'll get $20. But here's the punchline. The punchline is the group presented with the financial incentive took 3.5 minutes longer than the folks that did not have a financial incentive to solve the problem. I wonder how fully this message has gotten out. Like, what percentage of Americans would still be surprised by this today, 15 years later, right? This idea,
most.
Yeah, I think
vast
most.
majority.
I think most,
yeah.
Right? Because I mean, this certainly, I think this idea has penetrated. This idea that creative work is that people perform more poorly on creative problem-solving work when they have financial incentives. I think maybe to executive management.
Please. Yeah, this is the nuance. Yeah. Often here's another way to look at it is that we think that offering these kinds of contingent incentives, it doesn't have to necessarily be financial. All right. The problem with if-then rewards is not the reward. It's the if-then. That's actually a really important, and I don't think I say that explicitly in the book. Yeah. And that would have been, I think, a crisper way to explain it. There is a sense that money on its own is causing the distortion. Right. And that's a little bit of it, because money is typically the reward. The problem is the contingency. If you dangle something in front of me, dangle a reward in front of me, you have my attention. You have my attention in this very narrow way.
Exactly.
That's not how you solve the candle problem.
Right.
The way you solve the candle problem is you say, oh, wait a second. Well, let's try this. Let's try that. And this is the big problem with if-then rewards and many kinds of extrinsic rewards, but not all, are if-then rewards. The problem is the if-then, because the if-then is a form of control.
Yes.
And human beings do not do their best work, and certainly don't do their best creative and conceptual work under conditions of control.
Yes.
When you try to control human beings, you get 2 responses always. They either comply or they defy, but they very rarely engage and they very rarely innovate. So there is this thing. It's like people will look at this stuff or not read the book carefully or whatever and say, oh, money doesn't matter. Bullshit. Money matters.
Yes.
Or money is distorting in all circumstances. That's actually not true.
Yeah.
The problem here is that it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper into who human beings are. I believe, and from this research and from my lived experience, that by our nature, human beings are autonomous and self-determined.
Yes.
Now, you can change that, and you can change that with external controls. But those external controls, especially these if-then rewards, they have a cost.
Yes.
And our muscle memory, even to this day, is that if you want someone to do a job better, you offer them this kind of controlling contingent reward. And that is not the right move.
Yes.
There are other more sophisticated, more nuanced things that you can do. It doesn't mean you don't pay people. It doesn't even mean that you don't have any kind of variable comp. What it means is that you have to think twice about who human beings are and what truly motivates them.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, Dan, in my own life. When I was in high school, my parents were very kind of academically focused and expected their children to be academically focused. And at one point they said to me, Rufus, we're going to give you, I think I was maybe not working up to my full potential, Dan, in 10th grade or something. It's hard to imagine, I know. And my
oh, really? A 10th grade boy not working to his full potential. I'm shocked.
Hard to imagine. So my mother said, Rufus, I'm going to give you $50 for every A you get this semester.
Wow.
Right? Or something.
Okay.
It's something, I don't remember what the number was, but it was meaningful. And I was cash strapped, Dan. I really wanted that $50. But what I recall about that is that I was internally furious. I really was upset, and I couldn't articulate it about this offer that had been extended to me, because what it did, obviously, is it robbed me of the sense of ownership, of succeeding for my own reasons out of my own sense of pride and dignity. And so it had precisely the effect that you predict in Drive, which is, for a short period of time, it motivated me because I thought, I could use a couple $100, but it caused me to feel like my academic achievement was not my own; it was for someone else, not for me, and it really had a demotivating effect on me. So somehow it was. I had a very turbulent emotional response to this, and
that's interesting.
You see this in preschool children. Right? This is a wonderful study. You'll remember this as soon as I describe it. They take a subset of preschool kids who like to draw, divide them into 3 groups. One group is told, if you draw during this session, you're going to receive a good player certificate. And here's what a good player certificate looks like. It's adorned with blue ribbon and it has your name on it and stars. And wouldn't you like to have a good player certificate? So if you draw for the whole session, here, we're going to present you with this wonderful certificate. Group 2 is told nothing on the front end, but after drawing, they're given the certificate. Group 3 gets nothing. Up to 2 weeks later, the preschool children who were told, if you draw, you will receive the certificate, they drew less frequently and with less enthusiasm than the groups that did not receive the reward.
Who were not promised the reward and then received
exactly,
it, which is important. And these are children who were already identified as the kinds of kids who like to draw. You know, the kind of kids who would sit around and scribble and cartoon and so forth as little kids. So this is a great example of it because. Thank you for mentioning that, because it wasn't the reward itself. It was the contingency. The kids who got the thing after the fact, the reward was non-contingent. They kept drawing.
Yeah.
But the kids who were told that if you draw, then you get this, they basically said, oh, drawing is something only a chump does without any kind of reward. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it on my own volition. There's been subsequent research on this, on this idea of crowding out, on the crowding out of intrinsic motivation. The time I wrote the book, I thought the evidence was pretty clear. I think it's still more likely than not, but I don't think there's 100% inconvertible evidence that if-then rewards in every circumstance and every time always crowd out intrinsic motivation. I think that I'm less certain about that. I think it's more true than not true, but I don't think that it's 100% locked down. There's been some subsequent research showing that it has a less deleterious effect. I don't think we know why, but I think what's interesting is that it's not the reward. It's the contingency that is the really thing that causes the problem.
Well, and although I would say in support of the thesis and the various arguments in Drive, that actually what's fascinating is, and we'll talk about this more later in the conversation, that in the last 15 years, the world has moved very meaningfully in the direction of, in terms of how companies are operating and how people are, at least in this country, navigating their lives in the direction of greater focus on intrinsic motivation and autonomy and so on. But while we're talking about children, preschool children, I love this passage in Drive because children offer a kind of shining example of what intrinsic motivation looks like, right? If we don't screw it up with good player certificates. And so you write, if you write, a little child's life bursts with autotelic, meaning self-motivated experiences. Yeah. Children careen from one flow moment to the next, animated by a sense of joy, equipped with a mindset of possibility, working with the dedication of a West Point cadet. And then at some point, of course, we stop living with this kind of self-motivated joy. You had this conversation over lunch with the legendary Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is pretty cool. And he had an explanation for this, right? I think he told you start to get ashamed that what you're doing is childish as you get older. And so that's, it seems to me certainly part of what I took from your book when I first read it and when I read it again in the last couple of weeks is, my gosh, part of what we all want to do is to live with more childish delight and curiosity and engagement, and we have to unlearn some of the adulting in some areas of our lives, right?
I think there is something to be said for that. Now, there's something also to be said for maturity. I don't think that we should be spending our adult lives bouncing into walls and peeing in our pants and turning over sand pails, right? But there is something to that, and a lot of it is social and cultural. Yeah, and I think what Csikszentmihalyi was saying in part was that we end up in certain kinds of situations, end up in certain kinds of settings where the message is, that's not how we do it around here. We stay in our seat silently for 6 hours in this classroom. Yeah. I don't care if you're not interested in this. This is what you're doing. I don't care if you have a better way to do this problem. Give the teacher the answer he or she wants. And so I think it gets beaten out of us. And I think what's interesting, again, so much of this goes to premises, is what is our premise about human nature? And I think my premise about human nature, who human beings are, is I think that those kids are a better reflection of true human nature. Autonomous, self-directed, curious, meaning-seeking. And when you look at adults who are not that way, I don't see it as a flaw of an individual. I see it as essentially learned behavior from being in settings where that was the way to get by.
Exactly. And what so many adults are missing, you say in Drive, is autonomy, a path to mastery, and a sense of purpose. These are kind of the three legs of the stool, effectively, of intrinsic motivation, or what you call type I, interaction with the world. So maybe we could talk a little bit about each of these and maybe how your views on these topics have changed, if they have. I mean, like starting with autonomy, you say there's autonomy over task, time, technique, and team. Yeah. Clearly, we can't have complete autonomy.
No, surely.
Right? How do I think Americans, by and large, have more autonomy today than they did when you wrote this book 15 years ago, right?
I think you're right.
And hopefully that is having a positive impact on the sense of joy people are taking in their work. What do you think about the importance of autonomy and how, if at all, this has changed?
My experience sort of with these ideas interacting with the world, and then the research that has come up, I think that aspect of it is pretty darn solid.
It's held up. It's held up.
I really do. And then again, just to take one step back for the listeners, it's like basically the quick summary is that, to me, the best method to motivate people at work is to hire great people, pay them very well.
Yes.
Pay them very well. Pay them so well that they're not thinking about money, they're thinking about the work. And then offer this autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think when we get to these elements, autonomy holds up really well. What's more is that we had in the last 5 years, a massive experiment with autonomy.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yeah.
I mean, we really did. Listen, I wrote about remote work in my very first book, Free Agent Nation.
That's right.
And people thought I was crazy. They say, it'll never work. We don't have the technology, and you can't trust people to work on their own. Yeah. Then, in March of 2020, we had hundreds of millions of people figured out how to do it in 4 days.
Yes.
And then did it for a couple of years. Yeah. And so it's like, I think we have proof of concept that people relish autonomy. They can understand autonomy, that autonomy and accountability are not at odds with each other, that actually autonomy can and should be a pathway to accountability. Yeah. And I think that the idea of autonomy has deepened so much that people are bristling at these return to work policies. I think if we had remote work followed by these return to work edicts 15 years ago, people might have said, okay, boss. Now they're not saying that. They're saying, what are you talking about?
And there was just last year, a Pew Research survey of over 5,000 people found that 62% of self-employed workers say they're extremely or very satisfied with their job, compared with 51% of those who are not self-employed. So there's a 20% higher satisfaction among those who are self-employed. And you kind of, as you say, wrote about this.
I mean, I wrote that in Free Agent Nation too. I mean,
over 20 years ago, 2001.
I made that argument in Free Agent Nation. Yeah. So there was a little bit, a lot of, it's interesting on this broader topic. Forgive me for interrupting.
Yeah.
Is that, some ideas, some books take hold and some don't. Yeah. It doesn't mean that the ones that do are better than others. What it means is sometimes it means is that it's the right idea for the right moment. Like Free Agent Nation, I think it was ahead of the voters on that one. I think I stand by a lot of the stuff that I said in Free Agent Nation. I really do. Yeah. And again, at the risk of sounding like an ass, I was right about a lot of stuff in that book. But
yeah.
that book did not land with the impact that other things that I've done and other people have done. Because I don't think it was. Yeah. I think it was ahead of the voters. I don't think it was a right idea. I think it was a good idea. I think it was mostly right. It wasn't the right moment for it.
Yeah.
I think that Drive came out on the heels of the financial crisis.
Yeah.
So if it had come out 2 years earlier, maybe it wouldn't have worked as well, because there was a sense of like, wait a second, something is messed up. And one of the things I heard from readers almost from the beginning is like, and it's great for a writer. It's very gratifying for a writer to say, I had this kind of gut feeling, this intuition that this was not right, but I just didn't have the words to describe it. And this gave me the words to describe it. And I think that sensation was probably greater in the close aftermath of the financial crisis.
Yes.
And the world is probably more receptive to these ideas then.
Yep.
So if it had come out at a different time, it might not have done as well.
Right.
And that's just like, hey, that's how this game works. Like you don't have any control over that. Yeah.
That's right. Timing is huge when you look at the success of books, right? But I would also posit that part of what happened between the publication of Free Agent Nation in 2001 and the beginning of COVID-19, really in 2020, is that two-way video communication technology got way better, right? We actually had very basic video streaming in 2001, but we actually had really, really high quality video streaming by 2020. There are a whole bunch of tools that emerged that I think made it much more possible in 2020 than it was. But I think if you look at the data, my guess is that we've been moving incrementally towards more and more self-employment in this country for a while. And, something else I find interesting, just you won't be surprised to hear that I'm sometimes a little chatty, Dan, when I'm in the back of an Uber or a Lyft ride, because I find it's a great opportunity to connect with another human if they're interested in it, and people with all kinds of backgrounds. And even though clearly we have serious problems with like not having adequate benefits and compensation for a lot of people, participating in drive and ride sharing cars. And this may be a profession that is obsolescent with the rise of driverless technology. But It's amazing how consistently people say to me, I love the flexibility of this job. I can, I'm my own boss. I pick my hours, and it's not rocket science. Yes, it's out what you would call in the book algorithmic work. It's rote work, but there's a dignity to it and an autonomy to it that people seem to really like.
Think about it. Let's double click on that. You have autonomy over time. You can decide when you want to work. The other thing you have with Uber, in contrast to most jobs, is that you have autonomy over task. An assignment can come in and you can say no. Whereas like if you have a job, that's very difficult to do. And so you have autonomy over time, you have autonomy over task, you have some modest autonomy over technique. And there's also, and I think this goes to another aspect of intrinsic motivation, there is, as rote as it can be, there is some variety to it.
Yeah.
In that you have a chance to talk to different kinds of people, perhaps see different parts of whatever city or town that you're in. So but certainly the autonomy over time and autonomy over task are a big part of why people want to do it.
So mastery, you say in Drive, there are three laws of mastery. There's mastery is a mindset, it's a pain, and it's an asymptote. When you talk about mindset as important to mastery, I think you're referring to the work of Carol Dweck, who wrote this book, Mindset. She wrote about the growth mindset. Her book came out in 2006, just a couple of years before you were writing Drive, or maybe just as you were working on the book. But I don't think her work was as broadly known at the time. Was that a real influence on you in writing Drive?
Yeah, it was. And actually, I had read, she had another very academic book, the title of which is escaping me, that I used quite a bit. Her book, which is a great book, everybody should read that book, it really popped a few years later in paperback. And it could be the kind of thing where eventually this good idea stuck around long enough that the moment came to it. So certainly that this idea of the growth mindset was a relatively new concept then. Now it's become much more widely known. And part of mastery is the idea that you can improve your capacities. You can learn and grow and get better at something, that your capacities are not fixed. Your intelligence is not fixed. Your abilities are not fixed, that through effort and diligence and practice, you can get better.
Yep.
And getting better at something is, to me, one of the most wonderful experiences of being human.
Yeah.
Go back to your little kids, Rufus. When they get better at something, when they master something they didn't know how to do, it is a cause for celebration.
Yep. Yep. And I think in management, or better still, in helping to lead teams, because the word management is maybe not the word we want to use these days, right? Because people don't want to be managed. They want to be maybe led and directed, but given autonomy and mastery and purpose. But it's it's always stuck with me that you can when you're leading a team of people. I've had the great pleasure of starting a few companies. And, you can jump up and down and try to motivate people all you want, but really what works is to collectively produce evidence that you're making progress and to point out and celebrate that evidence. You have to actually document and celebrate evidence of getting incrementally better, because that's what we all care about. And actually, transparency and honesty when you're not making progress is critical to that.
Amen. And, the work of Teresa Mobile, which came out after this book came out, showing that progress is the single most important day-to-day motivator on the job, is perfect confirmation of that. The other thing when it comes to management is this book tells the story in part of these two great social scientists, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and who had been toiling away in Rochester, New York for decades. And I remember going up to visit them and talk with them and interview them. And Deci, who told me something that I think might be the most important sentence in that book for managers, which he said, you got to get past the idea that motivation is something that people do to other people. It's something people do for themselves.
Right.
Like if you're a manager out there, or business leader out there, just highlight that sentence. You don't need to read the rest of the book. I think so. What Deci said there is really important. And I think you make a really good point, is that many people do not want to be managed.
Yes.
They're willing to be inspired. They're willing to be led. They're willing to be encouraged. They're willing to be challenged. But because management is in some ways a form of control, not always, but often.
I, for one, have issues with authority, Dan, which I think is one of the reasons I've been self-employed for a long time.
But you know what? Here's the thing. Let me go back to that. I think there are two human responses to authority.
Yeah.
And yours is to defy. And many people, it's to comply. And what we really want is we want engagement. You can defy, break the shackles of that control, and then do your own thing. But control and management is ultimately about compliance.
Right, exactly.
And in certain business settings, we want compliance. There's no question about that.
Right.
But we often want something more than that. And in a world of, artificial intelligence, in a world of self-driving cars, in a world where machines are going to do certain kinds of work that human beings no longer are going to do, I don't know if you want an army of compliant people. I don't think you do.
I love this observation that extrinsic motivation is useful, basically, if you're trying to get people to do what you call algorithmic, or what I think of as boring work, right? If you're trying to get people to do boring work, extrinsic motivation, rewards helps. But, the good news is that the boring work is going away. Increasingly, what's left, and what's interesting is in Drive, you write about the offshoring of the algorithmic work was something that was on people's minds in 2009. Well, in 2024, 2025, what we're thinking about is all the algorithmic work is going to be done by algorithms, Right.
Exactly.
And so the work that remains for humans to do will be the kinds of work that needs to be supported with the kinds of encouragement that works with with intrinsic motivation. People are going to need to be intrinsically motivated to do this kind of creative, interpersonal, purposeful work.
This is, again, not to turn this into the celebration of the Daniel Pink oeuvre, but let me turn it into that. I wrote a book called A Whole New Mind in 2005 that made the case that we're moving away from this algorithmic left brain work to work that is more right brain, artistic, empathic, inventive. Now, I'd love to talk more about like some of the things I might have gotten wrong in Drive, because one of the things I got wrong in that book is that in a whole new mind is that, if you go back and look at that book, which is now 20 years old, almost 20 years old, I said, machines can barely recognize a face, let alone detect an emotion on the face. Sorry. That's done. Computers will never be able to write a sonnet or a song. I don't know about, and so I woefully underestimated how much technology would be able to do certain kinds of sort of right brain work. I do think that, basically what we need is we need to do things that augment machine intelligence rather than compete with it. But those kinds of things, I think, are slightly different from what I was talking about in A Whole New Mind. But I think you're absolutely right that if you want people to do things that are, actually AI is not bad at empathy either. But if you want people to do things that are more creative, iterative, about taste, about judgment, about discernment, you don't want people being controlled for those kinds of things. You want people self-determined, mastery-seeking, meaning-seeking.
That's right. So finishing up on mastery here, mastery hurts, and it's an asymptote, and it's asymptotic in the sense that it's a line getting ever closer to the vertical line, but never touching it. I feel that I've been hosting this podcast, Dan, for 5 years. I think I've gotten better at it, but I still feel very much in the middle of the learning curve of the wonderful challenge, which makes me highly, highly engaged with the process, right? Because I still feel like it's something we're refining. I'm always learning from other podcasts and always refining the approach. I wonder if as the asymptote flattens, as we get closer to touching the two lines, if it gets less rewarding. And what I'm thinking of here is I know that you, Dan, have been taking on some new creative challenges outside of writing. And I wonder if that is, if you think that part of what we find with the asymptote of mastery is that there's a point of some diminishing challenge of something where after we've attained a higher level of mastery.
I think there is. I think it's true. If you just look at, let's stick with the metaphor for a second. The slope is not as steep as it was. The slope of learning and improvement is not. That's what an asymptote is. You're not. So if you say to me, have you mastered writing books after 20 years and 7 books? I would say no freaking way. But I've gotten a lot better. Yeah. But I could do this for the rest of my life, and I don't know if I would ever. I don't think I would ever master it. But I think that the incremental improvement I will make from book 7 to book 8 is going to be less than the incremental improvement I made from book 1 to book 2, or certainly book 1 to book 6. Right. And because we are intrinsically motivated people, that we often will seek out different kinds of challenges. And so that's something that I'm doing myself. I'm trying some new projects that I haven't done before. I've started writing plays, which is adjacent to writing books, but very, 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 very different. And not something that I know how to do, and not something I'm necessarily good at. And something, believe me, without any extrinsic rewards. And yet I'm doing it largely for the slope. Yeah. I'm doing it so that I can get the slope of learning. So that, literally at the point where like I'm better at the end of a day than I was when I started the day, because I have so far to go. Right. And that's, and riding that slope up is exhilarating in and of itself. Yes. And so, but I also think that's why people take on a whole array of challenges in their life. It's why they play music on weekends. It's why they go climbing mountains on weekends. That's right. It's why they do all these kinds of things that have no extrinsic reward, but they do for the thing itself because it feels good to get better at something.
That's right. Well, the final leg of the tripod of intrinsic motivation is purpose. Has your view on purpose changed since you wrote Drive?
Yes. I got it wrong, or I didn't get it completely right. When I wrote about purpose in this book, I wrote about purpose as people are motivated to do large transcendent things, to do something day to day in the service of something larger than themselves. I'm feeding the hungry. I am solving the climate crisis. I am providing healthcare to the people who are in dire need of that. And the evidence is very clear that that is a powerful performance enhancer. But it's not the only kind of purpose. And there's a different kind of purpose, a smaller purpose. I started calling that first purpose with a capital P, and the other purpose with a small p. And it is purpose of, hey, I'm helping a customer solve a problem. I'm helping a teammate get a project out the door. I am providing for my family. And It's not big and transcendent. It is small, localized, every day. And it's really freaking important. And we have a lot of evidence that it's a performance enhancer. And they're not at odds with each other. And I think it's different when you think about making a difference, capital P, and making a contribution, small p. And I miss that. Because capital P purpose is kind of daunting. Like, it's not realistic. Yeah. I mean, I really miss this. It's not realistic to think about every single freaking day you come into the office and you're going to do something big and transcendent. No, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you can, there are moments where you can do that.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. And it is a performance enhancer. And there are more moments and opportunities in organizations than we realize. But that small p purpose is really, really important. There's a great study that I love that came out subsequently about cooks in a cafeteria. They couldn't see the customers and the customers couldn't see the cooks. But when you rigged up an iPad that allowed the cooks to see the customers, the quality of the food improved. There was no incentive. There was no like rah-rah meetings before the shift started. There were no bonuses or anything like that. It was simply saying, oh, wait a second. This is what I'm doing. I see the point of what I'm doing. And so their performance improved. That's not, they weren't feeding the hungry. They were just making lunch for people in a cafeteria in Boston, and their performance improved because they could see that they were making a contribution. And so that's the one aspect of this book that I'm kicking myself over. That I had too exalted a notion of purpose, that I missed the kind of quotidian, day-to-day, very meaningful, make a contribution directly to somebody in your midst kind of purpose.
Let's pause for a minute and recap what we've learned. Dan's thesis is that when it comes to human motivation, we spend too much time focusing on extrinsic motivation, which can be positive, think raises, or negative, think performance improvement plans. If you really want to motivate people, or motivate yourself, you're better off pulling intrinsic levers. First, give people autonomy, because we all want to have some control over our lives. We want to feel like we're in the driver's seat. Next, give them a path to mastery, because as human beings, there's no greater source of satisfaction than getting incrementally better at things. And finally, people need a clear sense of purpose. We do our best work when we feel we're in the service of something bigger than ourselves. But it doesn't have to be world-changing. We don't all need to solve the climate crisis or end global poverty, but we do need to feel like we're making a contribution, even if it's small. Some business leaders embrace these ideas deliberately, sure, but in the last 15 years, that's how long it's been since Drive came out, the world has done what it always does: move forward, shifted, evolved, with or without a business book telling it what to do. We'll talk about the ripple effect of those changes when we return.
I'm Jessie Hempel, host of Hello Monday. In my 20s, I knew what I wanted from my career. But from where I am now, in the middle of my life, nothing feels as certain. Work's changing, we're changing, and there's no guidebook for how to make sense of any of it. So every Monday, I bring you conversations with people who are thinking deeply about work and where it fits into our lives. We talk about making career pivots, about purpose and how to discern it, about where happiness fits into the mix, and how to ask for more money. Come join us in the Hello Monday community. Let's figure out the future together. Listen to Hello Monday with Jesse Hempel wherever you get your podcasts.
Struggling to meet the increasing demands of your customers? With Agentforce and Salesforce Data Cloud, you can deploy AI agents that free up your team's time to focus more on building customer relationships and less on repetitive, low-value tasks. That's because Data Cloud brings all your customer data to Agentforce, no matter where it lives, resulting in agents that deeply understand your customer and act without assistance. This is what AI was meant to be. Get started at salesforce.com/data.
So turning, Dan, to how the world has changed in the 15 years since Drive was published. So we've talked about how many more people are working remotely, how much more autonomy workers have. Let's also talk about the flattening of organizations in the last 15 years. One thing that's happened in the last 15 years is tech companies are now just incontrovertibly the leaders, the most valuable companies in the world are all tech companies. Yeah. They have a much more kind of overwhelming kind of leadership position in the world of business and management. And they tend to have flatter organizations and cultures. Like middle management positions have continued to decline according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics for a couple decades now. So you wrote about this in Drive, and this seems to be happening, and this seems to be aligned with a sense of greater autonomy for teams inside of businesses.
I think that's generally right. No, that said, again, there's nuance here. So, okay, I'll give you an example of this. Holacracy. At one point, 10 years ago, there was this whole idea that we should have holacracies where your job you should be able to do whatever you want, whenever you want, wherever you want, with whomever you want. No job titles, no hierarchy, no bosses, so forth. And of course, when that came out, people are like, oh, this is just like Drive. And I'm like, I don't know about this, dudes, because it's like there's a role for hierarchies that human beings have always established some kind of hierarchies. it shouldn't always be our go-to move, but hierarchies serve a function. There's an efficiency in hierarchies. And so I don't think they're going to go away completely. So it's possible. So some of these tech firms, they have a hierarchy. They also have flatness. That is, this is the quantum thing. Are they hierarchical? Yeah, a little bit. Are they flat? Yeah, a little bit. And now I think that if you were to go look at the Amazon or the huge, the Nvidias or the Apples of today, they're going to be less hierarchical than maybe the HP of 1974.
Yeah.
But there's still going to be some hierarchy there, and there's going to be considerably more flatness. And I think that's a consequence of technology. I think it's a consequence of more enlightened management practices. I also think it's a consequence of the fact that individuals today need organizations. Talented individuals need organizations, less than organizations need talented individuals. And so there's some extra bargaining power on the part of super talented individuals. So if you are the all-star software engineer, if you are the machine learning guru right now, they're going to let you work remotely.
That's right.
Okay. You want autonomy over when you come in? Great. You want to bring your dog to work? Great. You want this person on your team and not this person on your team? Great. You want to work on this kind of thing? Great. So I think all these things combined have given greater and greater autonomy to some people, not top to bottom in the workplace.
Yeah.
But to a lot of people.
It might be because hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people read the book Drive, and and I mean, it certainly had an impact. One data point that I love is the rise of B Corps, of public benefit companies.
Yeah, I wrote about this.
And you wrote this. You write extensively in Drive about Tom's Shoes, which actually I think was founded just before the B Corp was established in 2007. But I looked this up, and I thought it's kind of extraordinary. So some of the first B Corps were Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's. And when you wrote the book, there were fewer than 200 B Corps that were certified. By 2021, that was back in 2009. By 2021, 2021, there were 4,000 B Corps, and by 2024 now there are 9,400 B Corps. So there's been an explosion of public benefit companies. This is in 77 countries, 153 industries. So it does feel like there is a real groundswell, and there has been in the last 15 years of companies that have a more purposeful, and ethical kind of mission.
It's not every company. It's not necessarily the norm everywhere, but I do think it's far more common than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You see it with the rise of conscious capitalism.
Yep.
You see it also, I think, in part with some of the choices of individual employees. So they are more willing to, at the high level, are more willing to walk out if the company does something that offends their moral sensibilities. Or they're more likely to say, you know what, I don't want to work for, I'm convinced that at the most talented people in the workforce, they want to work for great companies. They also want to work for good companies.
Yes.
And I think that was not always the case. Certainly when I was coming out of college.
Because there were almost no good companies. There were very few good companies back then.
It just wasn't, it also wasn't part of the parlance.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do something valuable, you didn't go work for a company. You went and you joined the Peace Corps, or you taught school, or you worked for a nonprofit or something like that. But you certainly, so I think there is something, and I talk about that in the book about the purpose motive as an accompaniment of the profit motive. And I'm all for the profit motive. The profit motive has been an engine for progress in human civilization. There's no question about it. It's an important thing. It's just not the only thing.
Yeah.
And I do think that many human beings, when we combine them into organizations, are motivated by a sense of purpose.
Yep. As much fun as it is to complain about millennials, particularly for me, since I work very closely with a wildly talented producer of the show, Caleb, who's a millennial, we have to give millennials some credit, I think, for the shift in public sentiment. A recent Deloitte survey said that 43% of millennials and 50% of Gen Zers have rejected an assignment or project based on their personal ethics or beliefs. And
really?
Nearly as many have turned down an employer.
Interesting.
So
I did not know that. Yeah.
I think the data suggests that younger workers are even more focused on making sure that the companies they work for and the specific projects inside of those companies are benefiting, humanity.
Interesting.
I've been particularly fascinated. I shared this with you earlier by what's happening in the world of artificial intelligence, where, from my perspective, I think the stakes are quite high. I think it's important that the leading tech companies develop artificial intelligence responsibly. We've had on this show in 2024, Bill Gates on the show, Yuval Noah Harari, Stuart Russell, who runs the Berkeley AI program, all of them pretty alarmed about the potential existential threat of AI if it's not developed safely. So what can we do about it? Well, culture and values of employees seems to be a really pivotal and important variable here, because there was a millennial named Dario Amodei who was running OpenAI's development of GPT. He left OpenAI to start Anthropic, which is one of the top 3 AI companies now. Yeah. He left with eventually a dozen of the top people from OpenAI left in order to join Anthropic. It's a public benefit corporation. And now they're very intentionally creating what they refer to as a race to the top in terms of the ethics of how they're developing AI and setting standards for doing it responsibly. And that's attracting some of the best developers in the field. So in my mind, this is a really interesting example of this kind of purposeful orientation of business and application of ethics to business as a motivator for really talented people playing what may turn out to be an important role, for AI and for humanity more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's your interview with Harari, he's very alarmist.
Yeah.
And we're sort of giving humans godlike powers, as he would reckon with it. And that comes with, it should come with some guardrails, if not a moral perspective. I'm actually less alarmist than those guys are about all this. But on the other hand, I think when you're in the early stages, why not over select for the downsides and for alarm because could prevent some serious harm in the long run.
Yeah.
And there's so much energy behind the development itself that I don't think it's going to impair the creativity or the power of these things.
Yeah. Well, my PDUM is clearly higher than yours, but nonetheless, I think
my PDUM is not very high. Now, I think that's partly, I wonder if it's because I'm sort of a child of the Cold War. I grew up saying that, both the United States and the Soviet Union are going to blow each other up in this mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to really do anything. So let's go listen to some Nirvana. And
yeah, I was with you there. Yeah.
And that turned out not to be the case.
Yeah.
And so my PDUM is relatively low.
Good.
That said, I've been wrong.
Yeah. Well, thinking about AI and the future of work. So Bill Gates, when we talked with him, said that he thought that one of his biggest concerns is the erosion of purpose in a world that he thinks that building AI might be the last really hard thing that we do. But I think there's an interesting question about how we think about human motivation and human purpose in a world in which there's maybe less of an urgency around work for survival, right? I mean, this is a question that's kind of emergent, right? And I wonder how you think about that, because I think what you write about in Drive is quite relevant to this question.
I can put on two different hats to answer this question. So one, I'll put on the more annoying hat first, and the more annoying hat is the economist hat. And what Gates is succumbing to is what labor economists call the lump of labor fallacy, which is that there's a finite number of jobs to do. And once we have more efficient ways of doing them, then we're going to have people left with nothing to do. And that was the prediction in the Industrial Revolution. It was a prediction in the Information Revolution. It's never come true. And so the idea that I find it hard to believe that AI is the last hard thing that we do. I really do.
Yeah.
Let's mine minerals from space. Let's colonize the moon. Let's extend human longevity another 100 years. I think we're going to have plenty of hard things to do. I don't think we're ever going to run out of that.
Yeah.
So I disagree with that. I also disagree that with there's going to be widespread unemployment. Because again, here's the thing: we've seen this movie before. This, like John Maynard Keynes, the great economist. He said, in the 40s, oh man, not too long, we're going to have 12-hour work weeks and widespread leisure, and it never happened. President Johnson in the 1960s issued his Blue Ribbon Commission of labor economists, the smartest minds of his time, to evaluate the consequences of this new thing called the computer. And what's going to happen in the year 2000? Oh my gosh, computers are going to be doing everybody's job. There's going to be widespread unemployment. That didn't happen. So I think there's a certain poverty of imagination in the present on that, and I do think that it's also a lump of labor fallacy there. So I'm not as alarmed about that. Now that's the economist hat. The psychologist hat says that human beings are meaning-seeking creatures, that human beings seek out challenge. And we will find new challenges to seek out. It could be that there is a greater desire that our economies are built more around transcendence and something related to religion and a sense of purpose. You see that emerging now. Were these things that used to be hippie things that become mainstream? Yoga, meditation, psychedelics. Those all are about seeking transcendence. And so we could be doing more things like that. Human beings have, to me, a natural need to create and to adorn. I mean, I just listened to an interview with Jeff Bezos where he was talking about on his ranch in West Texas, there are these fragments of pottery from 7,000 years ago, and yet they're painted, they're adorned. Why? These people could barely survive,
right.
And yet they're creating yet they're creating beauty, they're creating art. It's like the fact that there is AGI doesn't mean that, I don't give a crap about doing anything. I just think that human beings are going to be human beings, and
for sure,
and we're going to have jobs, and we're going to have stuff to do, and we're going to have economies, and people are going to be doing stuff because that's how people are.
Well, and my optimistic take is that we will see, we will be doing more of the work that Motivation 3.0 requires, right? If Motivation 1.0 was survival, well, we've been doing less work to survive in the last,
absolutely,
the last 50, 100 years. I mean, we've all, at least in this country, for the most part, have, our basic needs for survival taken care of. Then working doing monotonous, boring labor out of necessity. That's still something that a lot of people contend with, but it's on the wane. And I think there's a pretty strong argument that these tech trends, including artificial intelligence, will result in most, if not all, of the boring work going away. And what we'll be left with is the kind of activities, the kind of creative and interpersonal connection-driven activities that require Motivation 3.0, which will make Drive, the surprising truth about what motivates us, highly relevant for another century.
Oh, good.
And
good,
beyond.
Right? My heirs need the royalties.
Exactly. But do you feel that way? I mean, I think it's kind of prescient in that sense.
Well, I mean, I think the arrow is pointing in a certain direction.
Yeah.
The arrow is pointing in the direction of greater prosperity and less physical labor. If you look at the rise of living standards in the last 100 years, it's breathtaking. If you look at the physical difficulty of jobs today, doesn't mean that all difficult jobs have been eliminated, but they're less physically demanding. Yeah. Right. And so if you take so let's see what happens. Let pull on that string a little bit. I think that jobs become less monotonous. Because there's certain kinds of white collar jobs that are monotonous,
Absolutely.
that are algorithmic, that are not very interesting. Those could conceivably go away. And if we have a social structure that ensures that people are able to survive, then not going to be impoverished because they were previously doing monotonous white collar work, and now AI is doing it. I think that we can have a just society. We can have a happy society. We can have a society where people are doing interesting things. I mean, here's the thing. I think that our world today is much more interesting than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
Yeah.
I think people spend time doing things that are more meaningful, that are more intrinsically motivating, that are more engaging. Think about technology. Think about the number of people who have podcasts.
Yeah.
That's an inherently engaging, interesting thing that people are able to do that they weren't able to do 10 years ago.
Yes, true.
So here's the thing. Like, I did this project where it was in about 1999, I went to eBay and bought a bunch of books that predicted what life was going to be like in 2000. You had about 50% who were wild-eyed dystopian. We're going to blow up the planet. We're going to run out of resources. We're going to have this charred landscape where unemployed people are going to be murdering each other for food. Then you had 40% who were these wild-eyed utopians.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to only work 3 hours a week.
Yeah.
We're going to have endless sex without consequence. We are going to live to be 147 years old on average. We're going to have energy too cheap to meter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Then you had 10%. Okay. And these are the people who didn't get any attention at all, who said, I think it's going to be a little better.
Right. Yeah.
And they were right. So,
yeah.
So the least interesting take is the one that was accurate.
Exactly.
I'm just skeptical of dystopians.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical of utopians.
Yeah.
I'm just basically look at the evidence. And the evidence says that, especially in this country, over time, things get better.
Yeah.
They don't get better in a massive way, but I think there is some exponential change that I think is powerful. But they get better. They don't get better in one fell swoop. They don't necessarily get better for everybody at the same time, but it's better. Do you want to be living in 2025 or do you want to be living in 1925?
Okay, here's my last question for you, Dan. According to Wikipedia, you just turned 60 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Here's what you wrote in Drive about turning 60. I don't know if you remember this, but there's a section where you write about what happens when people turn 60. You were 45 years old when you wrote this. You said, when people reach this milestone, they typically move through a 3-stage reaction. 1, how the heck did I get to be 60? Right? Surprise and alarm. 60, they think, is old. They tally their regrets and confront the reality that McJagger and crew were right. They didn't always get what they wanted. Okay, check mark there, or what do you say? Are you having that experience?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you pointed that out because I didn't realize that I had the phrase "tally their regrets." I had forgotten about that, and I ended up writing a whole book about that. So
you did it exhaustively. Right.
That's a tell. That's a tell.
Exactly.
In that book, yeah.
Exactly. So second stage of the 3-stage reaction is then they realize, whew, okay, it's all right. I have another 25 years. If typically on average Americans, I've got another 25 years.
Yeah.
Then the third realization is the last 25 years happened really quickly. When am I going to do something that really matters? Now, you have done quite a bit that matters. I imagine that you're feeling pretty good. But how do you feel about having crossed this threshold that you described in the pages of Drive 15 years ago?
Okay, I just want to correct the record for a second. I don't feel pretty good about what I've done.
Oh.
I mean, I feel okay about it, but I feel like that. I'm so glad you read. I actually have not looked at that for a long time, and it might be the most accurate thing in the book. That's exactly how I feel, that I don't have forever. And I know that, and I'm very conscious of that. And I think about that almost every day. And I don't want to throw away my shot. And when I look back 25 years ago, I've been doing the stuff that I've been doing for about 25 years. And I feel like it's happened like this.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to be, if I'm going to go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow morning and blink 3 times and then come back with you for 85-year-old me and, 82-year-old you in a podcast interview in 2049, I want to be able to say, I didn't throw away my shot, that I did something in 25 years, that I actually made a difference, that I contributed, that I challenged myself, that I produced.
Yeah, it's interesting. Me too. Right. Well, I think the passage of time does focus the mind. I mean, the finiteness of the time that remains, right? Which is in a funny way a gift, right?
Yeah.
Dan, you are hereby invited to come back on the show in 2049, and we can review our respective progress in achieving. I think we both achieved autonomy, but mastery and purpose in the next 25 years. So we have work.
Those are asymptotes, man. We're never going to achieve it, but we're going to keep working toward it.
We're going to keep working towards it. And I also hope to be able to report back to you in 2049 that you were right, that the world is the same, but just a little bit better. We'll see if we can make that happen. Thank you, Daniel H. Pink, for taking time out of your busy life, your autonomous, masterful, and purposeful life to be with us today. I so enjoyed the conversation.
It was great, Rufus. Thanks. What a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Daniel Pink is the author of 7 game-changing books. You know what? I'm going to list all of them. Free Agent Nation, Adventures of Johnny Bunko, A Whole New Mind, Drive, To Sell is Human, When, and most recently, The Power of Regret. You can buy any of them, or better yet, all of them, wherever you get your books. He also writes a column for the Washington Post, which I love. It's called Why Not? Highly recommended. As you know, Dan is one of our 4 curators at the Next Big Idea Club, alongside Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, and Susan Cain. And as a curator, he sometimes guest hosts this show. We've gathered all of his episodes in a handy-dandy Spotify playlist, which you can find in the episode notes, because they're all great. I think you'll enjoy them. Also in the show notes, you'll find links to the first 2 episodes in our Next Big Idea Classic series. Those are my conversations with James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, and Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor. Have you been enjoying this show? Are you a regular listener? If so, feel free to apply your autonomy, mastery, and purpose to writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We may just read it in an outro to this show. Have an idea for our next Classics episode? Drop us a line. We'd love to hear your suggestions. Email us at podcast@nextbigideaclub.com. Today's show is produced by our resident millennial, Caleb Bissinger. Sound designed by Mike Toda. Working with the wonderful team at the LinkedIn Podcast Network gives us a sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I'm Rufus Griscom. See you next week. Yeah, well, the other thing that I hope when we... I'm sorry, that's a smoke alarm going off in our household. Can we stop that, guys? Okay. Shoot, last few minutes here, Dan. We're just trying to close this. Is that always the team is making dinner? That's what's going on in the background, and although in the process of making dinner, they've set off the smoke alarm, which is the noise in the background.
I have done that. We had once a smoke alarm tied to a home alarm. We don't have that anymore. And my son and I were making Philly cheesesteaks in our house, and it started smoking, and it turned on the fire alarm, the smoke alarm, and I couldn't get it turned off, and it automatically went to the DC fire department, and within minutes I had firefighters on my front porch, and I'm trying to explain, no, we're making cheesesteaks. It was like mortifying. It's like, I'm so sorry for wasting your time. I feel so terrible about taking public resources because I'm an idiot making cheesesteaks.
Did you offer them a slice of cheesesteak?